rise for the jury.
Please be seated, everyone. The record will show that parties and counsel have returned to the courtroom after a brief recess. The state may call its next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Richard White.
Good morning, sir. You're headed over here to the witness chair. Careful of the stairs. Before you sit down, please pause and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Go ahead and be seated, sir. There are just a couple of rules in the courtroom. I would ask you to please wait for the attorneys to finish their question, then take a deep breath before you begin your answer. I'm going to ask them to give you the same courtesy to make sure that you're finished speaking before they ask their next question. Also, I'd ask you to be aware of that microphone in front of your person there and position that in a way so that it picks up your voice and we can hear you. And if you'd please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names for the record.
Richard White, R-I-C-H-A-R-D, White, W-H-I-T-E.
Thank you. You may examine the witness, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. White, do you go by Dick?
Yes.
Would it be okay if that's what I address you as?
Fine.
Okay. Dick, how old are you?
80.
Okay. And I might have you turn a little bit towards me and pull that microphone as close as possible, just so we don't lose your voice. Yeah. Are you currently retired?
Yes.
And when did you retire?
95.
What was your occupation prior to retirement?
Identification officer, Cedar Rapids Police. Identification officer.
And did you say that was for the Cedar Rapids Police?
Yes.
Okay. What year did you become a police officer?
1970.
Okay. Can you kind of walk us through your career as a police officer, what divisions or departments you worked in?
Officer White, I apologize for interrupting you. Could you pull that microphone as close to you as we can get it without pulling it off onto your lap? Perfect. Thank you.
I started in 70 as a patrol officer, worked that job for 4.5 years, took the test for promotion to ID officer, more commonly known today as crime scene investigation. Did that for the next 20 years.
So from 1975 to 1995, you worked as an identification officer?
Yes.
In December of 1979, were you an identification officer?
Yes.
Can you please tell us what an identification officer does?
Crime scene investigation regarding collection of any physical evidence, fingerprinting, photographs, any trace evidence might be.
So on a day-to-day basis, your primary responsibility was to process crime scenes and collect evidence?
Right.
During your years as identification officer, were there protocols and procedures in place in order to collect such evidence?
Yes.
Are those protocols and procedures that you followed at all times?
As far as I know.
Now, Dick, could you walk us through the training that you went through to become an identification officer?
The photography, I received training with the Iowa National Guard in photography. I went to classes for 12 weeks at Quantico, Virginia. Fingerprinting, I took a correspondence course through the Institute of Applied Science out of Chicago, and then followed that up with additional training, 3 sessions at the FBI Academy for crime scene investigation, certified as the expert in fingerprinting, and additional photography in the 1 class on gunshot residue.
Do you recall working on the case involving the murder of Michelle Martinko?
Yes.
And that was a case that began on December 19th, 1979, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Is there any specific reason why you remember this case?
It was my birthday.
So has that caused this case to stick in your head even more so because it happened on your birthday?
That and the local news stations reminded us every December 19th for 40 years and talked about advances in the case, possible more evidence. It's just a reminder each year.
Certainly. Can you please tell us how you were notified about this case and what you did after you were notified?
I was at home, received a call from the station to come in and go to the scene of the crime. I proceeded to the station, met Lieutenant Kidwell, the head of ID, and we took the van, proceeded to Westdale Mall.
Do you recall what time you were contacted?
Approximately 4 o'clock in the morning.
Were you given a description of Michelle's vehicle before you arrived at Westdale Mall?
No, Officer Kincaid was the one that found the car, Michelle's body in the car, and we drove there and could plainly see the car out in the parking lot. It was the only car in the area.
Was there anyone with the vehicle when you arrived?
Officer Kincaid, his partner, Officer Tim Houston, there were a couple other people that I can't recall at the moment.
Was their purpose to secure the crime scene at that point?
Yes.
In 1979, were there procedures and protocols in place to secure a crime scene before the identification team arrived?
It was standard procedure for officers that called for ID work, would stand by, make sure nothing was touched or disturbed.
Okay. And to your knowledge, had this crime scene been preserved until you arrived on scene?
Yes.
As part of the procedure and protocol, are officers not supposed to enter a vehicle?
Right.
Okay. Do you know if any officers had entered this vehicle?
I was sure that none had been in the car.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Dick, I've placed in front of you what's been marked as State's Exhibits 4A through 4V. Have you had a chance to review all of those exhibits?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, the State would move to admit State's Exhibits 4A through 4V.
Mr. Spies, have you had an opportunity to review the proposed exhibits?
I have, Your Honor. Government's counsel has furnished them to me, and we have no objection.
Hearing no objection, the court will receive and make part of the record States Exhibits 4A and B.
Dick, if you could please refer to States Exhibit 4A, which I believe is the one on top. And could you please tell us what we're looking at in that photo?
It's the aerial view of Westdale Mall as it was at that year. Since it's changed considerably.
Okay. And Your Honor, permission to publish 4A through 4V as we work through them?
You may.
Now, Dick, on the television screen above you, there should be a copy of States Exhibit 4A. And there next to you is a wooden pointer. Using that, can you show us on the screen where Michelle's vehicle was located?
Approximately this area here.
Okay, and you're pointing to an area outside of JCPenney?
Right.
And would that be in what was known at the time as the lower parking area of Westdale Mall?
Yes.
When you first observed the vehicle, can you describe how it was parked?
It was parked at a slight angle away from normal position. Lines on the pavement had areas marked wide enough for a car. This car was over the line in the rear, as if someone had swung into the parking, making a left-hand turn, and came to stop in that place, like someone had hurriedly parked rather than made sure that in the parking stall.
Okay. I'm showing you now on the television screen what's been marked as States Exhibit 4B. Is this a picture of the vehicle as it was parked that night?
Yes.
Okay. Did you take this photograph?
Yes.
Okay. Now, it appears to me that the photograph's a little cut off on either side. Can you explain to us why that is?
It was rookie problem for myself. The camera I used was one that the station supplied. Someone had used the camera for daylight photography and had not switched to the synchronization position for flash photography. In that situation, you're only exposing approximately half to a third of the film.
So due to that, some of the photographs you took only showed a kind of a narrow portion of the object you were trying to photograph?
Correct.
And this would be an example of that?
Yes.
Okay. I believe you described how you had seen the vehicle parked. If you could show us on the picture what you were talking about with the parking lines?
These lines were positioned across the parking lot for normal parking. And then, like I say, this was done without other cars being in the area.
What were some of your initial observations when you first got to the scene?
Well, the weather was extremely cold. Everything was covered with a thin frost. The car was covered windshield. I'd been there for quite some time, so the whole car was covered with frost.
Were the doors locked or unlocked?
The front doors and the rear right-hand door were locked. The left rear door was unlocked.
Okay. Now, as an identification officer, it's part of your job to process a crime scene for evidence. Is that correct?
Correct?
Okay. And in this case, the crime scene would have been Michelle Martinko's vehicle, correct?
Right.
So did you examine the interior and exterior of the vehicle for evidence?
I looked for any place possible for fingerprint. However, if I'd seen anything, I wouldn't have been able to process it normally. I used a flashlight looking at the doors and windows. Couldn't make out anything that was possibly processed at the scene because of the weather conditions.
Okay, so you did an initial investigation or processing at the scene, but then was the car later moved for further processing?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you were looking for some fingerprints. What other type of evidence would you be looking for or collecting at the scene?
Any signs of forced entry of the vehicle, checking doorknobs, basically just the condition of the car and the fact that Michelle's body was in the front seat on the floor on the right-hand passenger side.
So now that we are inside the car, could you just describe to us what you saw when you started looking inside the car?
Initially got in the back seat, took photographs over the back of the front seat, showing the position of the body, conditions in the car.
So you initially entered the vehicle through the rear door?
Right,
Would that be the rear door on the driver's side that was unlocked?
that's correct.
Did you find anything in the back seat of the vehicle?
There was a brown paper bag with a few items in it in the back seat on the floor. Didn't make any particular significance to that.
Would this be the type of brown paper bag you might get at a store or might be called a shopping bag?
Right.
Did you discover if there was a body in the car?
Yes,
And was that body later determined to be that of Michelle Martinko?
yes,
Was anyone else in the car besides Michelle?
no.
Okay. Please describe to us where Michelle was positioned in the vehicle.
Her body was in the sitting position on the floor on the passenger side of the front seat. Her buttocks would have been on the floor, her legs facing towards the steering wheel, her knees up underneath the dash, her upper torso leaning back over the seating part of the front seat. Her head was against the door on the right-hand side.
What was Michelle wearing?
She had on a rabbit fur coat, a black dress, high heels, and pantyhose.
Okay. Dick, the TV is going to be coming on here in just a second again. I'm going to be showing you what's been marked and admitted as State's Exhibit 4P. And if you'd like to just look up at the screen, can you tell us what we're looking at in this photo?
This is a fur coat. This is the leg, the dash of the car.
Is this photo being taken from the vantage point of the passenger, from the passenger side door?
Yes, at that time it's open, looking in.
And would this be the position that you found Michelle's body?
Right.
I'm now showing you what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 4O. Could you please describe to us what we're looking at in this photo?
This is the fur coat, black scarf, the black dress, her hand, chest area showing stab wounds to the chest.
And next I'll be showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 4U. Could you please tell us what we're looking at in this photo?
Again, the side of her face, the rabbit fur coat, the driver's passenger door armrest.
Now this photo, where were you when you took this photo?
That'd be looking out from the back seat over the seat facing her.
Okay, so in the bottom right-hand corner of that photo, that would be the back of the front seat.
Right.
Would this have been the view that you had of Michelle when you initially looked in the vehicle through the back seat?
Right.
Dick, in examining and processing the vehicle, did you find if Michelle had a purse with her?
It was on the seat. Her upper body was on top of it.
So you weren't initially able to see this purse?
I could see it, just part of it,
Okay, because her body was positioned over.
more or less on top of it, yes.
Was the purse collected?
Yes.
And do you recall examining the purse?
I don't know exactly how it was turned over to Tim Houston. However, we brought it to the ID Bureau after we transported the car, and he brought it up to the ID Bureau. We looked at it. It seemed to be in normal condition, hadn't been opened as far as we could tell.
So you examined the contents inside the purse?
Yes.
You didn't find any blood or anything inside the purse?
No.
So the conclusion you drew was that the purse had not been opened prior to maybe you taking a look at it?
Right.
Now, in examining the interior of the vehicle, did you observe blood?
Quite a bit of it.
Okay, can you describe to us where the blood was positioned?
Basically, all over the front of the seat of the car, the dash, the windshield, the visors, a little bit in the headliner, spatters of blood all over the inside.
Dick, I'm going to be showing you on the screen what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 4D. Could you describe to us what we're looking at here?
The interior of the car showing the door handle, the front seat, the back of the front seat. Her head would have been in this area.
And is this photo representative of the amount of blood that you found throughout the front seat of the vehicle?
Right.
I'm now showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 4E. Can you please describe to us what we're seeing here?
This is the front seat of the car, the steering wheel, the dash. It's not real plain, but there are spatters of blood all through the area.
Okay. Okay, now I'll be showing you Exhibit 4J. Can you please tell us what we're looking at in this photo?
Here again, the blood splatter on the dash, some up on the window.
So this is the blood spatter on the dash that you're referring to, maybe a
Right.
better photograph of it? In examining the vehicle, Dick, did you look at the area around the steering wheel, the turn signal, the gear shifter?
Yes,
I'm showing you Exhibit 4K. Can you please describe what we're looking at in this photo?
this is the steering column, steering wheel, the right side of the passenger seat. This is blood on the wheel.
Okay. So you found blood on the steering wheel?
Yes,
Okay, and you were just pointing to a couple areas of that, kind of in the middle there, the bright red spots?
right.
Okay. Did you find anything mixed in with the blood or anything else on the steering wheel?
There were fibers from the rabbit's fur coat in certain areas.
And did you find those in other places inside the vehicle besides just the steering wheel?
Yes,
And do you recall where else you found those fibers?
in almost all of the controls, the shift lever, turn signals, the lights, the steering wheel.
Next, I'm going to show you what has been marked as state's admitted as Exhibit 4L. Can you please tell us what we're looking at in this photo?
Here again, fibers on the steering wheel, blood, shift lever.
Okay, next will be State's Exhibit 4M. I'm going to focus in on a certain area here. Oops. Okay. What are we looking at in this portion of the picture?
This is gear shift lever with blood, some of the fibers.
And did you collect a sample of the blood that you found on the gear shift?
Yes,
How did you go about collecting that blood sample?
some of the blood was scraped with a razor blade, and then lifting tape used for fingerprinting was wrapped around, lifted the blood from the wheel, or from
that-
the shift lever.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. Would that have been standard practice for you to use a razor blade to take blood scrapings?
Yes,
Okay. Is the razor blade included with those blood scrapings in in how you package it?
yes,
Would it have been standard practice at the time to place the scrapings and the razor blade into an envelope?
yes,
Okay. Would that envelope have been sealed?
right.
Okay. What's the purpose for packaging it in that manner?
Well, if it's going to be sent to a lab to be analyzed, to make sure that the razor blade was included in case there were any material transfer, that's the way the lab wanted them sent to them.
And by sealing the envelope, you're preserving the integrity of the sample, correct?
Right,
And that's something that you did when you were processing this crime scene?
yes.
Now, once you had this item, the scrapings and the razor blade packaged, were those submitted into evidence?
Yes,
Yeah. And you mentioned that you did I think you said a tape lift or something to that effect of the gear shift.
yes,
Would that have been included in the sample, the packaging of the sample as well?
yes.
Okay. Dick, next I'm going to be showing you Exhibit 4N. It's up on the screen now. Again, could you just describe what we're looking at in this picture?
It's steering wheel in with shift lever, the fibers, there's the blood.
Now, in addition to collecting the sample of the blood from the gear shift, did you examine the car for fingerprints?
Well, I determined by this time that this subject is wearing some sort of glove, and that pattern from the glove would have been where it would normally look for fingerprints.
Okay. How did you determine that the suspect had been wearing some type of glove?
Well, due to the fact there were no fingerprints, and the areas that were touched had a pattern which was on the operating parts of the car, shift lever, the steering wheel, the door handles, including the keys, light switch. There's obviously not going to be regular fingerprints.
So you're telling us that you found a pattern on these areas of the car that could be operated, the steering wheel, the gear shift, other places, and you believe that that pattern came from a glove?
Yes,
Okay, can you describe what that pattern looked like?
it was a zigzag or a chevron type pad. I talked to a couple of detectives, and they agreed it looked like a glove print. Later in the day, I went to the store, purchased a pair of rubber gloves that had the similar pattern, took that back to the station, inked it like it was a fingerprint, and it matched the prints I was finding in the car.
Okay. And we'll get to those exhibits shortly. Referring back up to 4N, as I zoom in on the gear shift, can you point to the pattern that you observed that you believe came from a glove?
It was in this area here.
And you mentioned earlier that you took some type of tape lift of this.
Yes.
Can you describe what you did for that?
Well, fingerprint tape is normally used to lift powder after you've touched it for prints. In this case, I used the same tape, pressed it on the surface that had the pattern on it, lifted it, and applied it to a card or a paper.
And I'm showing you what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 4V. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
These are the lifts of the tape.
Sorry, I'm moving it as you're looking at it. There you go. Now you're looking at it the right way.
These were the patterns, different areas were actually blood sticking to the tape and then applied to paper.
So it looks like next to each of those patterns on that, on Exhibit 4V, you wrote where the patterns were taken.
Yes,
And in the bottom right-hand corner, there was one taken from the shift selector.
right.
Can you tell us where the other patterns were taken from?
This is from left front door handle. This is the push button on the door handle. On the bottom of the steering wheel.
And now, Dick White, when you took the print of the glove, in those locations inside the vehicle, was there also blood?
Yes,
Okay. Would there have been blood on the gear shift selector where you took that sample
yes,
and where you did the tape lift?
right,
So that blood would have came through also on the tape lift,
right,
and all that was packaged and submitted into evidence.
right.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier you attempted to determine what type of gloves or what could have left these impressions. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, and can you walk us through how you did that?
simply put the glove on like I was taking a fingerprint from an individual, press the glove on the ink pad, and transfer that to paper.
Okay. What type of glove were you looking at?
These were rubber gloves, normal household dishwashing gloves, or typical found in the kitchen.
Okay. And where did you obtain a pair of gloves like
I
this?
bought those from a grocery store.
Okay. Okay, this is Exhibit 4S. Can you please describe to us what we're looking at here?
Well, this is showing the pattern that I found on the interior of the car.
And this would have been an impression of the glove that you made?
Right,
And this is a true and accurate copy of what that impression looked like?
right.
Okay, as I zoom in, can you show us the zigzag pattern that you also observed on the inside of the vehicle?
All of this area, the fingers, the palm.
Is this a second impression that you took of the gloves? I'm now showing you what's been admitted as Exhibit 4T.
Yes,
And again, if you could just point it to us, the zigzag pattern that you observed that was similar to that that you found in the vehicle.
the whole palm area, the fingers of the glove.
Now, Dick, you mentioned that there was blood present on the zigzag pattern of the gear shift. Is that correct?
Yes,
Did you draw any conclusions after seeing this blood present on the gear shift and in the with the impression of the glove?
it was appear that the vehicle was driven.
Did you make any determinations or conclusions about when the suspect or the perpetrator would have been wearing the gloves during the course of events?
Due to the amount of blood, it would appear that the vehicle had these, when driving the vehicle, the driver's door, the handle of the outside, had the same pattern, not in blood, but in dust that was on the surface of the door handle.
Do you believe that the person who murdered Michelle Martinko was wearing the gloves when it occurred?
Yes,
I'm going to be showing you what's been admitted as Exhibit 4F up on the screen. Can you tell us what we are looking at here?
this is the door handle. The pattern was on the length of the handle there and on the push button. This was in dust rather than blood.
Okay. Yeah. And as I zoom in on this exhibit, is this the area where you were able to observe that zigzag pattern?
Yes,
And you described this as being left in dust, is that correct?
or film, road film on the door handle,
Just kind of what ends up on a car from driving it around?
right?
Did you observe any blood on this door handle?
No,
And again, this would be the driver's side front door handle.
right.
So what, if any, conclusions were you able to determine from the fact that there were glove prints on this door handle, but that it did not, those glove prints that were not left in blood?
Well, that the glove was used prior to the assault, and with the fact that there wasn't any blood, that it was before the assault.
So the person who killed Michelle Martinko would have been wearing the gloves before they opened the door.
Right.
Okay. Can you tell us what we're looking at now? This is Exhibit 4G.
It's a different angle of the door, again, with the pattern.
And next I'll be showing you 4H.
This is the door handle with the pattern on the edge. This area here might be mistaken blood, but that was rust on the door handle.
So you noted that at the time and determined that it was not blood, that it was rust?
Right.
Okay. Now I'm going to zoom in again on this exhibit, 4H. And again, could you show us the zigzag pattern that you observed on the door handle?
This area here on the cross top.
And one last photo. Again, this is Exhibit 4I. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Again, the zigzag pattern, the rust area I mentioned.
And just to look at it closer, would that be the zigzag pattern that you observed?
Right.
Okay, and then over here where my
Slightly.
cursor is. And over here where my cursor is circling, that would be the area that you determined to be rust, not blood.
Yes.
And I believe I cut you off. You were going to point to one more area if you'd like to do so, sir.
Some little bit of pattern in here.
Okay. And that would again be the zigzag pattern from the gloves.
Right.
Were you able to determine at all if the car had been driven after Michelle Martinko had been attacked?
Again, the fact that the pattern was in blood on the steering wheel, the shifter, the lights, the key in the ignition had the blood pattern on it.
Where was the seat positioned in the vehicle?
It apparently was in a position for a shorter person, probably Michelle, because it was close enough that when I moved after processing the car, I moved it from the garage to the evidence building, and it was uncomfortable for me to drive it. Apparently it hadn't been moved from where she had left the seat.
And did you investigate or look within the vehicle to see if the seat had been moved? Do you recall examining the lever or the handle that would have moved the seat?
I looked at it and saw nothing.
Okay, you didn't see any blood or you didn't see any rabbit fur stuck to the handle?
No.
Given that you found those items in so many other places in the car, did that lead you to believe that whoever was wearing the gloves that had blood and rabbit fur on them had not handled the lever to maneuver the seat?
No.
Were you present when Michelle's body was removed from the vehicle?
Yes.
Okay, can you describe to us how that process took place?
The area ambulance had been standing by. I instructed them I had opened the door, told them to move the body through that door, not to touch anything other than her person. The one ambulance attendant crossed her arms over her chest, reached under her arms, and lifted her out of the car.
Do you believe that care was taken so as not to disturb Michelle's body any more than was necessary to remove her from the vehicle?
Right.
And the vehicle was eventually removed from the crime scene as well, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, where was it transported to?
To the station's garage.
Okay, and how was it transported to the station's garage?
A wrecker hooked up to the front of the car. I personally reached in, put the car in neutral, turn the key so they would roll free, and it was stowed from the front position.
Were any of the tow truck operators inside the vehicle?
No,
Okay, so no one but you went inside the vehicle to get it ready to be transported?
that's correct.
Where was Michelle's body taken after it was removed from the vehicle?
Taken to Mercy Morgue by ambulance
Okay. And what was the purpose of taking it to the morgue?
so that the pathologist could do his work.
And the pathologist would be conducting an autopsy of Michelle Martinko?
That's correct.
Were you present for the autopsy of Michelle Martinko?
Yes.
If you could refer up to the screen, I'll be showing you what's been admitted as Exhibit 4Q. Could you describe to us what we are looking at in 4Q?
Be the chest area, a black scarf, the black dress showing stab wounds, exposed flesh.
I'll get there. Dick, now I'm showing you what's been admitted as Exhibit 4R. Again, could you describe to us what we were looking at in this picture?
This is Michelle's chin area, the scarf, the black dress, the stab wounds.
Sorry, that last part, were you pointing to did you say stab wounds at the top?
Yes, in the face area.
When Michelle's body was removed from the vehicle, was that done through the passenger side door?
Yes,
Okay, so she was not pulled across the driver's side.
right,
She was just taken, the passenger door was open and she was taken out that way?
yes.
And when the vehicle was prepared to be towed to the station, you mentioned that you had placed the car into neutral for the tow truck to move it. Did you take precautions not to disturb any of the scene when you handled the gear selector?
As much as possible, yes.
Okay. And was this after you had collected the blood scrapings from the gear shift selector?
Oh, that was done at the station after the car had sat for a few hours.
That's when you collected the blood scrapings?
Right.
Okay. Now, at the autopsy of Michelle, did you collect her clothing?
Yes,
Okay. Including in that clothing, did you collect the dress that she was wearing that night?
yes,
And did you collect that dress to take it back to the police station?
yes.
Okay. How did you package the dress to take it from the morgue to the police station?
Paper bags,
Okay. What other items of clothing did you collect from Michelle's body?
shoes, pantyhose, the dress, the rapid fur coat.
Okay. And would it have been your practice and procedure at the time to place those in different bags?
Yes,
And is that what you did that night?
yes.
Can you describe the condition of her dress when you collected it at the morgue?
It had blood on it, quite a bit of Spatters blood. As far as the condition of the dress, it was pretty much intact, but
Due to the blood that was on the dress, did you have to do anything with it once you got back to the station?
it was normal practice anytime we had bloody clothing to deal with, to lay it out and to be dried. In this case, I placed butcher paper in the north cell block and laid the dress out, spread out, so the area could dry.
Now, you mentioned placing it in a cell block. Was this a cell block that also housed people who were in custody?
No,
Okay.
hadn't been used for years.
So this was a cell block that was used for this purpose of placing items out to dry?
Yes,
Was this a secure area?
yes,
Would the dress of Michelle Martinko have been secured while it was drying out?
right,
And you stated that you placed it on a roll of butcher paper that you had laid out fresh for this dress.
yes,
Would it have been touching any other items as it was laid out to dry?
no,
Was this standard practice at the Cedar Rapids Police Department to dry out evidence in this manner in 1979?
yes,
Okay. And you followed all those practices and protocols that were in place?
yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness? Dick, if you could step down for a moment. Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 7A. Take a look. Take a minute to look at it. Does this appear to be the dress that Michelle Martinko was wearing the night she was murdered?
Yes,
And this is the dress that you collected and submitted into evidence that night?
yes.
Okay. Is there anything particular on this dress that you recall that leads you to believe that it is the dress that she was wearing?
Well, two areas. Here and here are sad wounds that were in the clothing. Everything else is above and fine. They expose the flesh.
And you're pointing to an area towards the top of the dress on the front side, on the left-hand side of the chest,
Right.
and that's where one of those stab wounds was located.
That's right.
And the other one would be more in the middle of the chest area, again on the front side of the dress. Does it appear to you that this dress has been tampered with at all since you collected it?
The tags have been placed on there during processing.
And did you take care at the time it was collected to make sure it wasn't tampered with?
Right.
Or it's not substituted? Has any other way been altered?
No.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to admit State's Exhibit 7A.
Any objection, Mr. Spees?
Your Honor, we do object at this point until the alterations that have been testified about and appear on the exhibit can be explained.
Very good. At this point, the court will not receive State's Exhibit, I believe it's 7A, until further foundation can be laid.
Thank you. Now, Dick, you mentioned that you retired in 1995, is that correct?
That's correct.
And to your knowledge, at the time you retired in 1995, was that dress still in evidence at the Cedar Rapids Police Department?
To the best of my knowledge.
Thank you. No further questions at this time, sir.
Do you have cross-examination, Mr. Spees?
I do, Your Honor. Thank you. Good morning, sir.
All right.
Investigator White, in anticipation of your coming into court today, did you have a chance to review the reports that you had prepared and the testimony that you had given earlier on in this investigation?
Yes.
So if I ask you about things that you may have testified about earlier, you would be familiar in general with that earlier testimony?
Right.
And by earlier testimony, you were interviewed in a county attorney's investigation back in 1981. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. And as I'm sure is routine procedure, you probably prepared some reports as well.
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned for us, Mr. White, that you noticed when you looked in the car, the Martinko vehicle, that the clothing appeared to be intact. By that, do you mean that it wasn't removed or torn from your perspective looking in the car?
That's correct.
And you observed in some of your testimony that the dress was pulled up. Did it appear that the dress had been pulled up when Ms. Martinko was either pushed or sat down in the floorboard area of the car?
Yes.
I'd like to ask you some questions about what you saw in the interior of the car, okay?
Right.
You told us that there was blood all over the front seat and that there were blood spatters on the dashboard, on the windows, the door handles. Was there also blood spatters on the headliner of the car
Yes.
and the sun visor?
Yes.
Would the blood spatters be on the sun visor both on the passenger side and on the driver's side?
I don't recall.
But in any event, at least one of the sun visors had blood spatters on
Right.
it. And you also observed blood spatters on the windshield, the inside of the windshield?
Yes.
When you examined the front seat of the car, this was a bench seat, is that right?
Right.
And did you notice any patterns of blood on the front seat of the car?
Well, there's blood on the seat where Michelle's head was resting.
Let's reposition that microphone. Again, what patterns did you see, if any, on the front seat?
Well, her head was against the door. Her upper torso was on the sitting part of the seat. There was blood there. Some blood had run some blood had run down her face and neck into her hair, and that was on the seat.
Okay, so I apologize if my question was unclear. What I was asking was, I know, or I should ask you, were the seats made out of fabric?
The bottom of the seat was fabric, the forward part of the seat was vinyl, and the upper part, up to the top of the seat, was also vinyl.
And in either the vinyl portions of the seat or the fabric portions of the seat, did you see any patterns of blood? For example, the handprint from the glove, did you see that on any part of the seat?
No,
Or an impression that might have been made by fabric from clothing worn by the assailant?
no.
Now, I think in your earlier observations about the blood spatter that you observed in the car, that you concluded that this blood could have come from spurting from the wounds that Ms. Martinko experienced?
Yes,
And based on your experience and your training as an identification officer in homicide cases, Mr. White, would you have concluded that the assailant would have had blood on his clothing or her clothing?
I would assume so.
I mean, there was blood everywhere in this car, wasn't there?
Right.
Next, I'd like to ask you a few questions about the steps that were taken to remove Ms. Martinko's body from the car, okay?
Yes,
You told us that an ambulance attendant, using the passenger side front door, placed her arms across her and was able to lift her out.
yes,
Did you actually observe that procedure?
yes, I did.
And was, as she was removed from the car, did her legs unfold then as she was moved?
Right.
Was she lifted up before she was pulled out, or was she had pulled out across the floor of the car?
She was lifted up.
And as you testified, then placed in an ambulance?
Right.
You told us about how the car was moved to the Cedar Rapids Police Department. I'd like to ask you just a few questions about that, okay?
Yes,
You've told the men and women of the jury and us that this was an automatic transmission car, right?
right,
And in order to move the shift selector so that the wheels could roll, you had to move the shift selector from park into neutral.
right,
It was in park when you arrived there.
right,
And again, to move the shift selector, you have to turn the key to either on or ignition to move the
Right.
shift selector.
yes.
Now, was this car trailered, or was it lifted by the rear end or front end and towed?
It was a wrecker hooked to the front of the car to tow it rolling on back wheels.
Okay. Before the car was moved, we know, of course, that Officer Kincaid was there, right?
Yes,
And you probably did a walk-around of the car before the car was moved?
right.
In your walk-around, of course, we know that the car had frost on it. Did you see any disturbances in the frost?
No,
As you looked around the car, did you look around the wheels of the car?
I would have observed him, yes.
Or, for example, did you get down to see if there was anything underneath the car?
I can't say we got down. I had a flashlight and looked around the outside of the car. It was pointed out to me the part of the fur from the coat was found in the parking lot behind the car, probably 20 to 30 feet. I believe one of the officers discovered it to keep it from blowing any further.
I understand that, but I was interested in knowing, did you look underneath the car while it was still there, parked in the parking lot?
Yes,
All right. And did you look around the wheels or the tires of the car?
I would have looked at it.
Beg your pardon?
I would have looked.
Okay. And in looking around the car, did you see any evidence of braking? For example, if the car had slid on the pavement, or that there was any scratch marks or scuff marks in the pavement?
I couldn't tell that.
You told us that when the car was moved, did you actually sit in the seat to move the shifter and move the ignition?
No. Reached in and turned the key and shifted to neutral, standing outside the driver's door.
So you didn't actually sit in the car until you moved it, I think you said, from the storage area to the identification area?
That's correct.
Was that same night,
Would have been later in the morning.
after the car had warmed up and the frost
It had
had?
been sitting for 4 or 5 hours.
But as you testified, it was your belief that the car was likely still in the position it would have been in when Ms. Martinko was driving it?
I assumed from where the evidence I collected that someone had driven it after the assault.
I'm sorry, I meant that the car seat was in the same position.
Yes, that would have been more the position Michelle would have had it.
Because I think, as you said, it was awkward for you to drive it because you were positioned so close to the steering wheel.
Right,
And probably not very much leg room for you either.
that's correct.
Okay. In addition to the enormous amount of blood in the car, you said and have identified photographs that show that there was fur throughout the car and fur on a number of features of the car, operating the car, like on the steering wheel, on the gear shift, on the turn signal, on the light switch. You said there was fur on all that stuff?
Yes,
And did you see fur also scattered throughout the car, for example, on the dashboard and the doors?
not much.
Did you conclude from what you observed and from your examination of the car, the position of Ms. Martinko's body, that there was no evidence of a sexual assault?
That's correct.
And that was quite clear in your mind, wasn't it?
Yes,
Next, Mr. White, I'd like to ask you some questions about the autopsy, okay?
yes,
You attended the autopsy, which I think was the following day. Is that your recollection?
it was later in the day, yes.
Okay. As you told the men and women of the jury, in your observation of the knife wounds, there were only 2 areas on the dress that you detected were areas where Ms. Martinko had been stabbed,
Right,
and the other wounds were to exposed flesh.
right.
When you took the clothing, including the dress, the pantyhose, the scarf, the underpants, to the police department, did you lay out all those items to dry, all the cloth items to dry?
Yes,
And then, in the course of your work, did you package or mark those some way for identification?
due to the fact that it was during the holiday season, it would have been possibly a week to 2 weeks before it was packaged.
Okay. If I may approach, Your Honor.
You may.
Mr. White, I'm showing you what has been marked as Defendant's Exhibit A1. And take a moment just to acquaint yourself with that exhibit, then I'm going to ask you some questions about it.
Okay.
Okay. Exhibit A1 is a black and white photograph that has been represented as being part of the packaging in which Ms. Martinko's clothing was enclosed in. And at the very bottom of Exhibit A1 is a tag, or a portion of a tag. Could you tell us what that tag is?
It's an identification tag of evidence the normal filled out. This has my initial, but I did not make out this guy. I signed everything R. White rather than D. White.
Okay. And is this a tag that would be characteristic of the tag that was used at the Cedar Rapids Police Department back then?
Yes.
And it identifies that, well, tell us what the tag shows is contained in the package.
It says dress, pantyhose, panties. I can't make this out.
What is the date on the tag?
12/19/80.
And do you know who D. White is?
Like I say, it implies that it's mine, but I did not make out that tag.
Do you know who did?
I'm assuming because of the other information there, this was done by Murphy.
In 1980?
Yes.
And did you make any tags of identification for the dress, pantyhose, and panties worn by the complainant? Did you make out a tag 1979 for those items?
I would have made a tag eventually, yes.
Mr. White, do you know what became of the scarf?
No.
When the car was removed and taken to the Cedar Rapids Police Department so it could dry off, so you could examine it more thoroughly at the police department, did you go back to the scene where the car had been originally located by Officer Kincaid?
In days following the initial investigation, I went back to the scene, walked around the parking lot, to make sure there was no sign of the weapon or the gloves. I can't recall the exact time or date, but it was after the initial investigation.
But we had heard earlier this morning that I think Officer Kincaid, or the officers on the scene, examined the perimeter where the car had been. Did you do a search like that yourself, where you kind of walk concentric circles around the car?
Yes, in marking the position of the car, I based off distances to known objects in the parking lot so I could remember in the future if that was the proper position.
And in doing that examination, did you find any blood spots or trails of blood?
No,
Find any discarded bloody rubber gloves
no,
or any weapons?
no.
Now there was, in the course of the investigation, there was some blood found up by Penny's. Do you remember that?
Yes,
And tell us, was this a pool of blood, or was it spatters of blood up by Penny's?
it was drops of blood as if someone were walking along up the steps and blood dropping from whatever wound it was present. I believe the initial check was done by Officer Kidwell. I don't know who else was involved, but
And were samples of that blood obtained?
yes,
And do you believe there's any connection to the blood that was found by Pennies to the killing of Ms. Martinko?
no.
Finally, Officer White, when you had a chance to more closely examine the automobile at the Cedar Rapids Police Department, did you see any evidence of damage to the car exterior?
No,
Or any scuffs or marks in the dust on the car that might have shown that there was a struggle outside the car?
no,
And if so, you would have noted that, wouldn't you?
yes,
So, based on your training and your experience and what you found at the scene of the crime, Officer White, are you able to say that the assailant, he or she, in leaving that car would have had blood spatters on his or her clothing and probably rabbit fur?
yes.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Redirect, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Your Honor. Could you walk us through, please, the procedures at the time for submitting items into evidence?
Well, there was an officer, the evidence officer was the officer that would receive it, packaged evidence, log it in, place it in storage within the station.
So somebody would have been responsible for transporting, in this case, the dress from the area where it was drying into evidence, correct?
Right,
Okay. And at some point, a tag is made to keep track of the evidence, correct?
right,
Okay. And you stated that you would have made a tag eventually.
yes.
Was it uncommon to have somebody else make an evidence tag?
If we were going to the lab, anyone would, to maintain the chain of evidence, they would put their own marks on it.
But the actual evidence card itself, once it's submitted into evidence, it might not be uncommon for somebody else to make that tag.
Right.
Dick, I know that you didn't work in the evidence room, but can you say with certainty that once items were placed into evidence, they were secure at that point?
Yes.
Did you have any concerns that evidence might not be secure once it was placed into evidence?
No.
Thank you. No further questions.
Additional cross-examination.
Well, Mr. White, do you know what the history of the dress, pantyhose, and panties worn by Ms. Martinko was between December 19, 1979 and December 19, 1980?
No.
Thank you. No other questions.
Anything further, Mr. Harris?
Thank you, Mr. White. I don't know what title to use. You may step down, sir.
Thank you.
You don't know that.
State may call its next witness.
Can I just check and see, make sure the witness is available?
Yes. Good morning, sir. You're headed right over here to the witness chair.
State called Jim Kim.
Okay. Mind the steps, Mr. Kidwell. Before you take your seat, please pause and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead and be seated. There are just a couple of rules when we're in the courtroom. Please wait for the attorneys to finish their questions before you begin your answer. I'm asking them to give you the same courtesy to allow you to finish answering before they begin the next question. Also be mindful of that microphone. We're going to ask you to position that right in front of your mouth so that we can hear you. If you'd please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names for the record.
James F. Kidwell. James is James. Last name Kidwell, Kidwell.
Thank you, sir. You may conduct your examination, Mr. Maybanks.
Thank you, Your Honor. You go by James or Jim?
Jim,
Okay, Jim. First of all, tell us how old you are.
78,
Where do you currently live?
Adkins, Iowa.
Are you currently retired?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work history before you retired?
Starting when, sir?
Just start when you started working. Just kind of guide us through it.
In high school, I worked for the State Conservation Commission. From there, I went in the Army after graduating from high school. Spent 3 years in Ethiopia. Came home, went to work for Potawatomi County, Iowa, which is Council Bluffs. Sheriff's Department for about a year and a half. Then moved to Cedar Rapids on the Cedar Rapids Police Department as a patrol officer. From there, about five and a half years after that, I was promoted to identification officer. And I'm not sure when I made lieutenant, but I'm thinking 77, 78. And I retired at age 40 due to a heart attack, and I was lieutenant at that time.
And what year was that then when you retired?
1982.
In December of 1979, then, were you assigned as a lieutenant?
Yes, sir.
And what area of the police department were you assigned to?
Well, I'm going to run you through the whole thing. When I got promoted to lieutenant, I was promoted and it was called Lieutenant of ID because we never had a officer in charge other than an ID officer. And somebody at City Hall decided that the table of organization did not have a place for a lieutenant of ID. I then was assigned to work in the Detective Bureau, but instead of the Lieutenant of Detectives, it was Lieutenant of Police, I don't know what the difference is. A lieutenant to lieutenant made the same money.
Okay.
And that's where it went from there.
So in 79, you were a lieutenant. Were you
Yes.
overseeing the ID Bureau?
Basically, yes, but as you say, over in charge, I did the scheduling, if there was scheduling, if one of the ID officers wanted off, I took care of that, or vacation. I did the ordering of supplies and things like that, but yet I also worked in the Detective Bureau.
We've mentioned the term ID a couple of times already here. Can you kind of tell us what that means or what it meant back in 1979?
ID officer is, as most people here would probably get, is like a CSI, your crime scene investigator. You went to crime scenes, you collected any type of evidence involving that crime, whether it be fingerprints, blood stains, photographs. You would take photographs of all this. Just any evidence at all that you could collect and preserve to handle your case and try to find who committed the crime.
Did you take a role then as lieutenant overseeing some of those activities?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to become involved in the investigation of the homicide of Michelle Martinko that took place on December 19th, 1979?
Yes, sir. I received a call roughly 4 o'clock in the morning advising that there was a homicide. I told the party calling me to call Identification Officer White to the station. I would meet him there and we would go to the scene, which we did.
We heard extensive testimony from ID Officer White, or former ID Officer White, this morning. What I want to ask you about right now, Jim, is did you become aware that as part of the investigation that ID Officer Richard White had seized several items of clothing that Michelle Martinko was wearing at the time that she was killed?
Yes.
And have you had a chance to review some documentation regarding those items of clothing, and specifically the black dress that was worn by Michelle Martinko and actions that were taken by the Cedar Rapids Police Department related to that black dress after it was seized?
Yes.
Can I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Be handing the witness what's been previously marked as Exhibits 17A, 17B, and 17C. And I'll ask you, Jim, if you had an opportunity to review that documentation prior to today. If you need to take it out, that's fine, too.
Having a problem getting it out.
I had the same issues.
Ah,
Let me help.
I don't know if I can get better. I'm getting old. There. Yes, I have.
Does that include the other two exhibits as well?
Yes, sir.
Is it your understanding that Michelle's black dress was sent to the FBI crime lab in Washington, D.C. in approximately January of 1980, based on those letters?
Yes.
And do these records appear to have been made at or near the time that Michelle's black dress was sent to the FBI crime lab?
Yes.
And were these records generated by persons with knowledge of the existence of Michelle's black dress and knowledge that it was sent to the FBI lab?
Yes, sir.
And after reviewing these records, can you say that these are records that were kept in the regular course of business activity at the Cedar Rapids Police Department at that time?
They should have been, and yes, they would have been.
Was it regular practice to make and keep copies of records such as this to document, for example, correspondence between agencies that coordinated with the Cedar Rapids Police Department in investigating crime?
You're talking about the police department, not me personally.
Yeah, was it regular?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Does your name appear on these documents?
Yes, sir.
And again, do these documents refer to items submitted that were evidence by the Cedar Rapids Police Department that included Michelle's black dress?
Yes, sir.
As a lieutenant of the criminal division at that time, or in the role that you described, was it regular practice for you as a lieutenant to be involved in matters pertaining to the transfer of crime scene items or evidence for analysis and testing?
I think I was advised, but I wasn't in charge of doing it personally.
So you were aware of it?
Yes.
Do these appear to be fair and accurate copies of business records pertaining to the black dress worn by Michelle Martinko that was sent to the FBI lab for analysis and then returned to you in March of 1980?
Yes, sir.
And they appear to be fair and accurate copies to your knowledge?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, move to Interstates 17A through 17C.
Without objection.
The court will receive and make part of today's record States Exhibits 17A, B, and C.
Jim, if you could, for us, to the best of your recollection, describe the process, as you recall it, that was used to secure and package items of physical evidence at the Cedar Rapids Police Department to make sure that the integrity of the items were preserved.
A lot of it depended on what type of item, but clothing, anything that the weather would contaminate, I guess is the word, would be bagged in either a paper bag or a paper envelope, sealed up. There'd be an evidence tag placed on each item, and everything would have been, my shirt, my trousers, my socks, they'd all be in a separate bag or envelope, depending on the size.
Was that common practice back then?
Yes, sir.
And was that also done to prevent any kind of altering, tampering, or substitution of items?
Yes, so that nothing got contaminated.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
So I'm looking at 17A right now.
Yes, sir.
And on the second page and about the middle of the page, it says, on December 19th, 1979. Do you see that where I'm referring to that?
Yes, sir.
Does this exhibit indicate then a summary of the Martinko case and items submitted to the FBI lab?
Correct.
And now I'm looking at 17B here. Does this also contain on page 2, I'm looking at now, first paragraph continued under item J, a reference to Michelle's dress?
Yes, sir.
And does that indicate then in this letter that her dress was being sent to the FBI lab?
Yes, sir.
And finally, on State's Exhibit 17C, do you see on the front page here, again, noted with a parentheses J, but a Q9 number assigned by the FBI, reference to Michelle's dress as well?
Yes, sir.
And does this indicate that those items were returned, attention to you, to the Cedar Rapids Police Department?
Yes, sir.
And pursuant to your practice at that time, are items such as this returned back into evidence using the same procedures?
Yes, sir.
If you would, for us, Jim, do you have a reading glasses or anything like that? All right.
This one's almost close enough I can read it.
Go for it, if you can.
All righty.
This, I'm going to have you start on page 2 of 17C with the results of the examination.
No hairs like these. I better use this.
Okay. Nice effort, though.
If I can find it here. There we go. No hairs like those comprising specimens K1 found on or in the specimens Q4 through Q11. No hairs. Okay, like those, comprising of K3 specimen were found on the glass microscope slides containing hairs previously removed from specimens Q2 and Q3 in parentheses FBI laboratory report 00107080 S is Sam, U, there's a space between the numbers in that S. There's a space between capital U, capital J, a space, V, I, parentheses, period. No hairs of value for significance comparison purposes were found on the Q12 specimen period. Do you want me to read? There's 2 more little paragraphs.
If you don't mind.
No problem. Group A, human blood, was identified on specimens Q8, Q9, Q10, and Q11. No blood was found on specimens Q7 and Q12. Submitted items are being returned to your office under a separate cover by registered mail.
Now, in State's Exhibit 17C, which you just read, Jim, had previously identified the dress as Q9. You remember that?
Yes.
And what you just read, did that indicate that Group A or Type A human blood was identified on Q9 as well as other items?
Yes.
Okay. Well, to your knowledge, was that essentially what at least one of the requests was that was made to the FBI to try to find a blood type for the blood on the dress?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, like I said before, in cases such as this, I'm talking about a pretty serious homicide case. Were efforts made and endeavored by the police department to ensure that items of evidence like this are handled appropriately?
Oh, absolutely.
And at the time, in evidence, items such as this involving Michelle's clothing, were those returned to evidence, properly secured again with all the procedures to make sure that there's no altering, tampering, or substitution that takes place?
Absolutely, they would have been turned over to the evidence officer who would log them back in, I assume, to his log.
And to your knowledge, based upon your experience with the Cedar Rapids Police Department, do items that are turned over into evidence remain there until checked out for further analysis or observation or such?
That or released by the court.
And if there were further events where the dress were to be taken out of evidence and analyzed or handled anyway, would that be documented?
I don't know that it did, but if it were removed, my idea would be, yes.
That was the expected procedure?
When I worked there, yes, it would have been.
Okay, all right.
And,
And
I'm sorry, but I'm getting, this happened in '79, I retired in '82. I can't say what happened after I left the PD.
Right.
But I cannot believe that they didn't adhere to the strict rules that they always had before.
all right, thanks, Jim. That's all I have for now.
Cross-examination, Mr. Spees.
Good morning, Mr. Kidwell.
Morning,
Good to see you again.
thank you.
Your brother and I were well acquainted in Iowa City.
I know.
Officer Kidwell, you supervised the investigation of the Michelle Martinko homicide until your retirement, didn't you?
Yes,
And you in fact went to the scene the night of the murder, didn't you?
correct.
Did you do any independent investigation yourself at the scene, or did you simply supervise other officers who were doing that investigation?
I oversaw ID Officer White and observed the scene, made sure that the patrolmen that were there were being careful not to let any onlookers there, which at that time of night, we didn't have that many. Yes.
And then after the investigation was initiated, were reports furnished to you so that you were kept abreast of the investigation?
I didn't see all reports from like detectives. Anything to do with the ID Bureau, I'm sure I did. As far as the evidence that Officer White collected, I'm sure I did.
Okay. And you just described for the men and women of the jury some of the procedures that were used at the Cedar Rapids Police Department, including the handling of physical evidence, the handling of specimens that were obtained from physical evidence. Would it, let me ask you this. The events about which we're here occurred in December of 1979, right?
Yes, sir.
And were there tags that were used to tag evidence or containers that contained evidence at the Cedar Rapids Police Department?
Yes, we had tags that you wrote the information on.
Okay. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm going to show you what earlier was shown to former Detective White, and It's a Exhibit A1. It's a black and white copy that you're about to look at. And I'm directing your attention to the tag, or the photocopy of the tag that shown on the bottom of Exhibit A1. Take a minute to look at that and see if you recognize that tag.
I can't positively say one way or the other.
Do you know?
I'll be honest with you.
Okay, and I appreciate your honesty on that, but it appears to refer to items that were in a container, a bag, and it's signed or has the name D. White at the bottom. Do you know who D. White is?
That's what's kind of throwing me.
Tell us why.
Dick White, as I recall, when he signed evidence tags, it was always R. White. Like mine would be James F. Kidwell. He was either R or Richard White. And I don't recall if he used his middle initial or not. But he's got D, and he could have, because everybody knows him as Dick. So I don't know. I can't.
That's not your writing on there, is it?
No.
You were,
At that time, I wrote a lot better.
okay. And
Not now.
in December of 1980, you were still in the Identification Bureau.
Yes. Well, I was lieutenant of police in the detective bureau. I shouldn't go into that.
I'm not going to ask you to get into it.
Yeah. Yes, I was.
But was there a D. White in the police department in the identification or the section that would be in charge of maintaining the integrity of these exhibits?
Just Richard Dick,
Just Dick.
the one that was here just previous to me, I believe.
This tag appears to be connected to a container holding the dress, pantyhose, and panties worn by the complainant. Do you know what happened to the scarf?
No, sir.
You've testified for us, Officer Kidwell, or Lieutenant Kidwell, that it would have been proper police procedures to package items like clothing in paper sacks, right?
Correct.
And not in plastic bags.
No.
That would be poor police procedure to package items of clothing in plastic bags.
Correct.
And it would be even poorer police procedure to package multiple items of clothing in the same container.
Correct.
Would it also be against policy and poor police procedure to leave items of physical evidence unattended in somebody's office not connected to the property section or to the investigation section? Just unattended.
Would you repeat that, please?
Good point. So would it have been poor police procedure to leave items of evidence someplace where they couldn't be accounted for or don't know how long it's been there?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Those are all the questions I have for you, except for some questions just briefly about the Exhibits 17, A, B, and C that you just testified about.
All right, sir.
Did you direct that the dress be sent to the FBI laboratory in Washington, D.C.?
No, that would have been James Barnes, the assistant chief.
So even though your name appears on that correspondence, that procedure was initiated by somebody else, Jim Barnes in the police department?
Yes, he was assistant chief of detectives. If I recall correctly, he called me in to tell me they were sending these items in and had me sign it, as you see, my signature on it. I noticed he did not sign it, but
Understood. So when the items were returned from the FBI laboratory, were they directed to you to maintain a chain of custody?
I'm assuming so, being my signature is on the letter. Now, I don't know if that would have been a copy, or he did in fact sign the one that was sent with the articles. But my guess would be that mine was the only signature, just like you see there.
Thank you. No other questions.
Redirect?
Okay. Jim, you were asked about whether it was proper procedure to package items of evidence, multiple ones in one package. You remember that?
Correct.
Okay. In your experience, if items are packaged separately, but they're secured, each item, are they sometimes put in a package together if there's packaged separately?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I misunderstood that part of it, I guess.
No, I'm not saying
But
that's.
yeah,
bad question.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Why send each package separately when you put them in, let's say, a box, as long as they were each separately packaged and evidenced to go in that box to be sent out for testing?
Okay. And next question I have, you were also asked whether it was poor police procedure to not account for items and where they've been. My question is it the expected procedure that if items are checked into evidence, that officers can be confident they'll remain there until checked out and analyzed again?
Correct.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Additional cross-examination, Mr. Spees.
Nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kidwell. You may step down.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have reached the time where it's appropriate to break for lunch. So I will once again remind you of that admonition. Please keep an open mind. Do not discuss the case amongst yourselves. Avoid any media coverage. And we will be in recess until 1:30 this afternoon. Thank you, folks.
Please rise for the jury. You can leave your notebooks on your chairs.